It is my great honour to introduce to you Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who will be delivering a unique masterclass today at the 5th Israeli Presidential Conference. Not only do Ayaan and I, and I'm very proud to say, share the same alma mater, Leiden University in the Netherlands, but as a feminist myself, I see Ayaan as a light tower for both women in the East and West. Ayaan is known for her staunch challenging of women's status in Islam. She is the founder of the AHA Foundation, which works to protect and defend the rights of women and girls. From oppression justified by religion and culture. Ayaan was born in Somalia and eventually immigrated to the Netherlands as a political refugee via Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, and Kenya. In 2003, she was elected as a member of the Dutch House of Representatives, representing the People's Party for Freedom and Democracy. In 2005, Ayaan was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. In 2006, she published a memoir entitled Infidel. Ayaan has also received several awards, including a free speech award from the Danish newspaper Jyllands-Posten, the Swedish Liberal Party's Democracy Prize, and the Moral Courage Award for commitment to conflict resolution, ethics, and world citizenship. Today, Ayaan, a US citizen, is a fellow at the John F. Kennedy School of Government and at Harvard University and a member of the Future of Diplomacy project at Harvard's Belfer Center. I feel privileged to present to you Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Thank you, Ronit, very much for your kind words. Thank you all for coming on this very hot afternoon to listen to someone who really is not equipped to give a masterclass. I'm not a teacher by profession. I'm not a professor. I'm not used to doing what you're asking me to do, but I appreciate it that you're here instead of lying by a pool somewhere in your swimming outfits. I wish I was doing that. I've been asked to give an answer to the question that I'm going to read out loud to you. Is it possible to it starts with, has the Arab Spring become an Islamist winter? If it has not, is it possible to prevent the spring from becoming a winter? My husband is British. And when I read this, I said to him, I know you guys like talking about the weather. But why are Israelis talking about the weather? When I was growing up, every day was the same. So we didn't talk about the weather. And you can tell by the central question that we think of the spring as positive and of winters as negative. If you have hay fever like me, you actually don't like the spring that much. If you have taken to skiing like I have just done, you welcome the winter. In other words, the metaphor of the weather really is not appropriate to describe the events that we've seen take place around you in the region from early 2011. And a lot of what has happened and what is happening has, yes, led to hope, massive collective hope. what we hoped for, I live in the United States, and what our mainstream media reported is now quickly overtaken by events. So much so that even the people who coined the word spring really no longer use the term spring. I'm going to give you just a small list of the facts that I read in the headlines when I follow the events that are going on in the Middle East and North Africa. There is a war now. Undeniably, that's a fact, between Sunnis and Shias. The discontent in Syria among the population against their own regime has triggered an unintended consequence, a war between Sunnis and Shias. And as an academic, I'm not supposed to state anything, but ask the question, what are the consequences, intended or unintended, of this conflict? 93,000 people, according to the last count that I have read, are dead. What could be the positive unintended consequence? What could be a negative unintended consequence? The answer to that always depends on who you speak to. The young man in Tunisia who burned himself alive and probably triggered this sequence of events was not demanding political freedom or religious freedom. He just wanted to have his stall, to sell fruits and just feed his families. If you take that, as many economists have done, then the Arab Spring was about an economic uprising. In Egypt today, there are men and women who stand in very long, hot lines, demanding food, wanting to buy bread, and there isn't enough for anyone. And it's the same all across the Arab Spring regions. The economies are today worse off than they were before the revolt. That's another fact. The only question is, what does this mean exactly? And the answer, of course, depends on who you talk to. Geopolitical affairs. Of course, in Israel, it's very important to talk about peace. I prefer the word quiet. Things were quiet. No, there was peace on paper between Jordan and Israel, Egypt and Israel, and things were quiet. That peace is still on paper. In reality, it's no longer there. There's some kind of quiet interrupted by noises here and there. But what's the status of that? What is the power of the Islamists in Jordan? And what does it mean for that kingdom? What does the immediate future of Jordan mean for relations between Israel and Jordan? Then there is America's reluctance to intervene in things Middle Eastern. To be honest with you, when I think these things through, I want America big and strong and present in the Middle East. But when I listen to Americans around me, and they're Republicans and they're Democrats, there is no appetite for presence in the United States. a lot of Americans on either side of the aisle believe that this is all motivated by energy. And they've been able to persuade the government and civil society to explore alternative means to energy. And a lot of success has been made in that, so much so that both the leaders of both parties see themselves being lobbied day in, day out to get out of the Middle East and stay out of the Middle East. I see the logic of that. I understand where that sentiment is coming from. I disagree with it. But as an academic, I'm not supposed to tell you what I agree or disagree with. Then there's always Iran. Not Iran as the mad mullahs trying to develop a nuclear bomb and start a war, but Iran as a hegemon in the region. See, if America decides to get out of the region, that doesn't bring in stability. It also doesn't bring in what those commentators and lobbyists are trying to do in the United States, which is if we leave Muslims and Arabs alone to their business, they're going to sort it out and somehow to come to a conclusion. That is not the reality. The reality is when you create a power vacuum by a major power, another major power steps in. Iran is destabilizing Iraq. Iran is completely embedded in the politics in Syria. Iran has a regime in place that believes more in what comes after death than in life. Iran is a regime, not the people, but the regime is a political entity I would not trust to develop a nuclear weapon, let alone have it. We've almost forgotten about Yemen, but it was one of the early Arab Spring countries. It is poorer today than before the uprisings. It's less stable today than before the uprisings. It has more strongholds today of Al-Qaeda than before the uprisings. Another little country we've forgotten about is Bahrain. The uprisings in Bahrain, shouting for political freedom, and some of them for economic freedom, have been quelled with the strong hand of Saudi Arabia. Quelling and driving people from the street square does not mean that that conflict is resolved. It is simmering on. And in the broader context of Sunni-Shia conflict, that resentment is there and it's not going to go away. And it may be consequential. Libya. The United States and allies stepped in and helped to drive away Gaddafi, which was a good thing. But the one thing that the United States fails to answer, the one central question we fail to answer in America always, is what happens after the bad guy is driven away? How long do you want to hang around? A majority of the American population feel, A, you do not need to intervene, but if you must, get rid of the bad guy and get out. Well, if you do that, then look at Libya. You have a nation state that is perpetually on the brink of civil war. Well, the rest of North Africa, people point, if you read the commentaries, about how monarchies in the Middle East are doing better than military despots. If you sit in a room only full of philosophers, it's very easy to reach the conclusion a despot is a despot. Get rid of them. But monarchies, dynasties have played the game differently. And the Moroccan king gave some leeway on political freedoms, did some bribing, and for the time being, he and outsiders think that he may be off the hook. But the Islamists in Morocco are very, very strong. How strong they are, we will learn in a very short time. The advantage that he has now, as opposed to 2011 and the other monarchs, is to point to places where people have actually gone to the ballot box and made elections and are now faced with the consequences, such as in Egypt. So the Moroccan king can tell the population, is that what you want? Algeria, very sad story and a very sad history of confrontation between various despots. The Algerian despots today are just as bad as all the other despots in the region. They have repressed the Islamist threat for a while, but is the Islamist threat in Algeria over? By no means. Then you get the little countries, the United Arab Emirates, midget giant Qatar, Kuwait, Oman. These are not democracies, but they have somehow maintained a political economic model that does attract outside investors and doles money out to the population, makes use of immigrants to do the dirty jobs, suppresses dissent with a combination of the carrot and stick, and kindly exports conflict. On a macroeconomic level, they may be doing well in terms of stability in the opinion pages of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. But don't fool yourself, they are not stable. And then, of course, there is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is my favorite antagonist, the Dark Vader of Dark Vaders. They have succession issues. The 80-some-year-olds sit for hours and days and months thinking about how to pass power on to the 71-year-olds. With all due respect to my audience of 70 plus today. But the young and restive population of Saudi Arabia, relatively young, are demanding more freedom. There is a women's activism there that I find so heartwarming, the only positive thing I can say about Saudi Arabia. But in opposition to them is a virulent Wahhabi clergyman. And then, of course, there's the military dependency on the United States, and WikiLeaks has revealed that for the Saudi regime, monarchy, whatever you want to call it, if they were to choose between an ally as Iran or Israel, they actually prefer Israel. Even though their textbooks, their universities, the propaganda they spread around the world is anti-Israel and anti-Jewish. Welcome to Saudi hypocrisy. Turkey. I don't know how many of you have been following what is going on in Turkey, but the Islamist Turkish prime minister who thought that he could take advantage of democracy and the institutions of democracy to transform Turkey into a Sharia state is confronted with young demonstrators doing exactly what democracy tells them to do. If you are dissatisfied, protest, among other things. And he has quelled that with a strong hand. All across the region, even in countries that were not directly affected by the Arab Spring, what you see is the phenomenon of brain drain, something that was going on since perhaps the 1950s, if not earlier. And it's not only an outflow of brains, it's also an outflow of money and entrepreneurship. In the Middle East and North Africa, most people talk about one commodity almost all the time: oil. Oil, oil, oil. But what we forget is another commodity, and that is water. a water crisis to the Middle East can be devastating, truly devastating. And in fact, you may not find it on the front pages of newspapers, but today there is a possible war. I'm not saying war, but a possible war between Egypt and Ethiopia over a war along the Nile. Then, of course, there is the demography, that huge bulge of young men, a tornado of testosterone that started all of this. That's not over, it's not gone. And that group is just as large, they are mobilized, and they're just as angry. They may be off the streets, but they are not gone. Al-Qaeda. Our government in the US told us last year that they were gone and done over. We defeated Al-Qaeda. But no one really believes that. Al-Qaeda and other jihadist movements, of course, prey on this huge bulge of men. It's so easy for them today, so much more than 10 years ago, to inspire and recruit young men who have no sense of direction and no sense of belonging. And we see them do it shamelessly. Another factor that works to the advantage of Al-Qaeda and other jihadist groups is the large numbers of displaced peoples and refugees. Now, to go back to the central question on the weather. Has the Arab Spring turned into an Islamist winter? And how could we stop it? If we take the combination of all of these facts that I have listed, and they are not exhaustive, I've not said every word on everything, then I can tell you it is pretty chilly, and it's pretty Islamist. Yesterday in the plenary session, I called myself an optimist and a realist. And to be realistic is to face these facts, not to camouflage them, to face the facts that are posed by not only the geopolitical and the economic and the social issues that are going on around you, but also the cultural, the socio-cultural basis that either feeds it or exacerbates it and is a huge obstacle to any solution. You may ask me, so where do you get your optimism then? I'm going to share 3 things with you. 1, the emerging women's emancipation and sex revolution. If you hear anything about sexuality, you know that women are involved. What we see are more and more reports, very little, no statistics yet, anecdotal evidence that more women, relatively young, from middle-class families, connected to television and in the internet. And television is mostly soap operas. Produce as many soap operas as you can, and love novels. And more of these young women are refusing to comply with demands of submission, whether it's to the family or to religion or you name it. You hear about such famous incidents as Malala Yousafzai in Pakistan, but there are so many Malalais here in the region. You read about the 8-year-old little girl who is married to a 50-something-year-old man, and somehow she knows to find her way in Yemen to a lawyer. And that becomes an iconic case. She demands divorce, and she gets divorce. And that way, she's inspirational to thousands, if not millions, of women. The Saudi women who demand the right to work outside of the home, where a lot of Americans think, why do you want to work? You guys have so much. But they want to work because they know that that is a source of dignity. And how do they demonstrate? They go and drive. I love that. The Tunisian woman who finds collaborators from Eastern Europe, and they start what is a topless jihad against Islam. Go online and Google topless jihad. But the most remarkable trend I read this week is in Iran again. And I think if any change is going to come out of the Middle East that is really consequential and revolutionary, it is going to come from Iran, because the people of Iran have actually lived with Sharia. In Iran, as reported in the magazine Foreign Policy on May 29, and the title is The Erotic Republic. Apparently, in the last 30 years, there has been a sex revolution. An important consequence of that is that Iran's population growth has plunged to 1.2% in 2012 from 3.9% in 1986. I read that article and I thought, if this is what 3 decades of Sharia does, then wait. Let them have Sharia in Egypt. But it has to be through the ballot box. Imagine what it would do elsewhere. The second factor that gives me optimism is that young people are demanding more. They're demanding more from their political leaders, but these demands do not stop with the political leaders. It goes over to the religious leaders. When you read all about the Sunni-Shia confrontation, and you just read what ordinary people are saying, they're asking themselves, why? What God wants this? And an unintended positive consequence could be that as these questions are asked, people will want to know from their God, why do you demand so much blood? It's only a matter of time before the Prophet Muhammad and Allah are subjected to the same scrutiny as Mubarak and Morsi. Number 3, watching Turkey in the last few weeks, I think political apathy is on its way out. Even prosperity, a good economy, does not buy you apathy. I'm encouraged because it is something that started with a confrontation about a park. The Prime Minister wanted to get rid of a very old garden and build a shopping mall. Now, I am a consumerist, I'm a capitalist, I love shopping malls. But in this case, I think that garden needed to stay there. Why am I optimistic? Because people who are voting who are protesting about a garden find themselves side by side with women who are protesting for their rights, with gay people who are protesting their rights, with young people who want to drink and dance. And that, if you continue, you look all over the region, you combine that, you will find that all of these things together, taken together, mean one thing, and that is that more and more individuals are demanding individual space. I am an optimist and a realist. I'm a realist in the sense that I'm not blind to any of the negative developments to the power of the Islamists. Not just their military power, but how enticing and appealing they are. But I'm an optimist in the sense that if any emancipation in human affairs is to have a chance, it has to begin with individual emancipation. I don't know what time it is. I'm looking at you, but whatever few minutes we have, is it 3 minutes? I was going to save some time for a question and answer. Well, we are told we have 3 minutes. Thank you.
You're right. 3 minutes. Okay. No time for questions? Okay.
Well, welcome to Israel.
Thank you.
It's an honor to be in your presence, and I just have a simple question. After everything which you have endured as a young girl and a young woman, what is the source of your humor?
That's good coming from an Israeli.
And an American, an Israeli and an American.
An Israeli and an American. We have a very short time. Some of the funniest people I have met, and I'm not kidding you, in the Netherlands are Holocaust survivors who talk about their experience in camp, and I'm fighting back tears, and they're having slapstick jokes about the Nazis and their times and the people they were imprisoned with. And that is a story that has to be told 1,000,000 times over. I think it's very sad that in Europe, they're weaning out stories and the history of the Holocaust on the demands of Nazis. But if you ask me, where does your sense of humor come from? I think if you've been exposed to a small taste of hardship, you will have a sense of humor. If you don't have a sense of humor, you're just not going to make it in life. Thank you.